Welcome back to DXB Today. Hope you're enjoying the show and I hope you are having a pleasant evening. Now we're doing distance learning at the moment. Not actually doing distance learning, but we are discussing all things distance learning. Why? Because it is back. And with good reason, given the uncertain times we find ourselves in at present. But what have we learned from previous utterances and instances of all things distance learning? And what impact is it having not just on the family household, but on the children themselves? Well, joining us now is a psychiatrist who specialises specifically in children and adolescents' mental health. Please welcome to the stage and to the sofa from Sage Clinic, Dr. Tazim Danji. Doc, really appreciate you saying. Thanks so much indeed for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's get into it, because it's not just a case that we've had, 5-6 weeks of learning the impact that distance learning has on children, because we went through a significant period 6 years ago, albeit that was then, this is now, the circumstances are different. But from your sort of takeaway of the last 2 months or so, 6 weeks to 2 months, I mean, what are you seeing in terms of the emotional impact that this change to schedule is having on children?
Yeah, so I think we're seeing a whole host of varying emotional responses to what's been happening. I'm seeing a lot of clients so children, adolescents coming into my clinic who are showing some signs of anxiety, fear and uncertainty about the situation. But I'm also seeing children come in quite indifferent, don't seem to be effective, others are withdrawn. And so I think one of the things that's really important is to say that actually whatever emotional response you're having, it's validated. Everyone is, similarly to adults, we're all responding in different ways. And I think for some of the older children that I'm seeing, a lot of that anxiety is around exams. So we did hear recently that maybe the IB exams have been cancelled. And so a lot of the children that are coming into my clinic have been worried about not being able to get their projects done, especially things like art and things that you need to be in school for. And for younger children, I'm seeing a lot of changes in terms of, I guess we could say, regression. So difficulty separating from their caregivers, wanting to sleep with their parents at night, maybe even sort of toileting accidents, things that happen during times of anxiety. Yeah.
What should you do as a parent when you're seeing that type of behaviour? Should you let your child sleep in your bed, for example, if they're struggling? Do you lean into it or lean out of it?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, and it's about having a balance. So we don't want to create a new behavioural problem, but what we do want to do is we want to try and offer that space for emotional comfort. And so it might be that on days that are difficult, or if there are, specific alerts that are happening through the night, or if you just notice and you're checking in with your child and they're showing that actually they're feeling a little bit more overwhelmed that day, that actually that could be a day that they are sleeping in with you. But it definitely does not want to, you don't want to create a pattern. Yeah.
What if they're playing up? And they're using the sort of current circumstances to go, oh no, Mum, I can't concentrate on my home learning today. I'm too upset by everything that's going on. And you're like, really?
Surely not.
You seemed fine.
No.
And there's sort of, how can you pass that? How can you figure it out whether they're, taking the mickey, or whether they're actually finding it really hard to buckle down and concentrate because they're hearing interceptions, for example?
So at the end of the day, children are children. They're always going to push boundaries, right? I think I like to use the analogy of an iceberg. So what we see on the top of the water is usually a smaller part of the iceberg. It's usually the behaviours that come out. So that could be clinginess. It could be, trying to take the mickey. But what we don't realise is the huge part of the ice that is underneath the water, and that's the emotions. And children have difficulty expressing their emotions. So sometimes it's a little bit about, creating that space. How do you develop the right language to be able to help your child express themselves? And how do you explore some of those emotions that might be behind it? So you can even say to your child, I wonder if, are you actually feeling a little bit more anxious or overwhelmed? Why don't you tell me what's going on? Maybe we can work through it together. And that's a nice way to kind of lean into a conversation and really think about what's happening with the behaviour. Is that a result of what's going on in the situation? Because I think another thing I would say is that, as adults do, sometimes when we're feeling overwhelmed, we tend to retreat into things, and that might be things like social media or gaming. You might find that your child is, addicted to their screens. You might also find that they're avoiding schoolwork. But what's underlying that? Sometimes it's the overwhelm, like if we're feeling quite overwhelmed with work at the moment, we find it really hard to kind of switch off at night. We might turn to some reality TV that is just going to, help fill in the gap. But actually, our attention span isn't great at that time. Maybe our anxiety is high. And so children do the same, but just in different ways.
And this is something I'm curious about, because I have friends who are parents, but they're actually facing the fear more so than their kids. So I want to know, did you experience parents being the overprotected and the one that wants their children to be surrounding them at that time, especially the parents that are going out to work and leaving their children behind? During school days as well. Yeah. So how has that been impacting parents itself?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a very scary time for parents. What I would say is that we have to also remember that as parents, we need to give ourselves some grace. Some parents will have come to the UAE as a safe haven. Maybe they are also being re-traumatized because they've come from a place of area of conflict themselves, right? So I think parents need to be able to help children you're role modeling that it's okay to have big emotions, but we can manage them. And you might do that by trying to think of, what are the things that really help me manage my emotions? Do I need to take a bit of a pause during the day? Would that be, sitting with a cup of tea and a biscuit, or do I need to sort of get onto a call with a friend or someone to help me manage my emotions? And then you can be there present for your child. So I think it's absolutely okay for parents to also show their children that they're struggling, but together to try and co-regulate and teach their children that, actually I take a pause by taking a few deep breaths.
So what's some really simple, easy, day-to-day things that we can kind of put into our lives if you have children that can make things a little bit easier, less overwhelming for them if they're facing certain challenges during this period?
Yeah. I would say the biggest complaint I have from young people when they come into my clinic is that my parent doesn't understand me. So what I would say is the utmost thing is to create that safe space and validate your child's feelings. So as parents, we want to go straight into problem solving, right? That's what a parent wants to do. But you need to kind of sometimes sit in that emotion and be able to help your child feel understood. And you can do that quite simply by sort of summarizing and saying back to your child, okay, I understand that this happened today. You're feeling a little bit overwhelmed and maybe that's making you feel upset. Have I got that right? Check in with them. You then can actually ask them to give them some autonomy when things feel a little bit out of control for them as well. Give them some autonomy and say, what would you like me to do in this situation? Rather than saying, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this. So that would be really helpful. I think micro resets in the day are really helpful. So we've talked about sort of online learning, and actually you want to try and incorporate some grounding and calming activities through the day. Things like spending a bit of time with arts and crafts, or maybe going for a walk or doing some stretching. That can be really helpful to reset. And I think, that's helpful for children. For adults, we mentioned it could be sitting with a cup of tea or speaking to a friend. And then I think transition after the school day is really important. So what I would say is when you're thinking about transition, particularly if you're staying at home, so you finish the online learning and then you're staying at home, how does the child then transition? Maybe you say that, okay, you're going to go for maybe a cold shower, or maybe let's go for a 20-minute walk. Some children might choose to wear their uniform when they're doing online learning and then change their clothes. So that's an easy transition. So you're getting into your home kind of evening life. So I think all of those tips can be really helpful.
Amazing.